Hi guys, thank you very much for joining in for today's session. Today we're going to be talking about country risk, which is a part of FRM level 1 content from valuation and risk model. Okay, the idea of this chapter, the summary of this chapter is primarily to give you a basic understanding about how a company tries to assess a country risk. What are the major factors that you see which are affecting a country risk, and what are the major services, what are the tools that you can use to track it. Okay, so the first slide that you can see on the screen is primarily about chapter summary, and it defines what exactly a country risk is. And when you as an investor or as a company you're assessing a country risk, you're primarily trying to answer these two questions. Okay, the first question is, what is the rate of required return when you're investing in a particular country X? Okay, that is a very important question because you're investing your capital in that country. If there is no security, there is no guarantee of you getting back your money with an appropriate return, then you will not go and invest in that country, right? So that is the first question that an investor faces. The second question is, which when you're comparing different countries, whether you want to invest in Australia, whether you want to invest in Somalia, then you will have to understand the country risk of that, so that you can make a comparative analysis. So that is the second point. So whether country X is riskier than our own domestic country, or is it riskier than some other country? Why? So that kind of questioning an investor or a company will do to analyze what is the country risk that they are facing. So with this theory or logic, we will start out with the chapter. We'll start with the reason to assess a country risk. Okay, so they have, as per the curriculum, we have bifurcated it into two, as an individual or as a corporate. So as an individual, there are a lot of funds available in market through which you can directly invest in a lot of emerging or developing economies. Okay, for example, there is an ETF available from Vanguard or BlackRock, which basically helps you to invest directly in those countries. But when you're investing through these funds also, you face a risk of that country, whether that country does not perform in terms of economic, in terms of political, in terms of social conditions, your investment is at risk. So as an investor, whenever you are investing outside your country, that risk or country risk is faced, and that's the reason you need to assess the country risk in detail. That is the first point. Second point being your corporation. So today, a lot of bigger companies, suppose US-based companies, are earning their income from India and China. Okay, so if there is any political issue, if there is any economical problem in these two countries, that will affect their shareholders, that will affect the earning or profit, right? So as a corporation, companies do invest in a lot of foreign countries, and when they invest, they need to assess the need or the risk that they're facing in that country. Okay, and the last part, which has been highlighted in bold, is to emphasize that when there is high economic risk or basically less stable political climate, the risk of that country goes high, and hence the risk of your investment also goes high. Okay, I'll just quickly walk you through the topic in your book so that you can relate to what you're reading from the FRM curriculum. So the first topic which we're going to be reading in country risk is basically identify the source of a country risk. And in this entire piece, they're talking about the risk faced by the investor and risk faced by the company or corporations. Okay, so we basically talked about that. And next part, or the next topic that we're going to be starting about, is what are the key sources of country risk. So over here you see it has been highlighted, those key sources. So we're going to be talking about those key sources in detail. We'll be opening up for questions at the end. You can mark it down, your question, in the chat box also. So what are the key sources of country risk? So as per the curriculum, they have highlighted four major sources which can affect your country risk. So first being your economic growth life cycle. That means what is the GDP growth in that country, how much money they are churning out, what are the business growth that is happening in that country. So you can bifurcate it into two or three stages, primarily a developing nation or a matured nation or emerged nation. So those kind of stuff. And on the basis of that, you can highlight that if you're in a developing country, then you need a lot of support from the government. You need a lot of support with respect to your raw material, with respect to your capital, with respect to your labor force. So those supports might not be available in an emerging or a developed country. But if you're into a developed country, then those services or those raw items are available for you to work upon. Okay, next is your political risk. So how much stable is that political parties in that country, how the transition of power is happening in that country, whether it's a democracy or whether it's an autocracy. So those kind of topics are going to be discussed. Then we'll also talk about legal risk. So how fast litigation is solved in that country when you're facing a problem as a company with respect to copyright, with respect to patents, with respect to property dispute. So how fast the judiciary of that country is able to resolve that issue. We're going to be talking on that. Then we'll also talk about the economic structure. So the reliance of the economy on a particular service or commodity will also have a great impact on the performance of that economy, and hence a great impact on you as a company. So we'll talk about these four in detail. The first being the economic growth life cycle. Okay, this primarily talks about the level and the growth of GDP. So in India also we were talking about at one point in time 8%, 9% GDP growth, and then we came down to around 4.5, 5%, and now we are seeing that it might even be as low as 1 or 2%. So how fast an economy is growing will have an impact on you as a business also, because the consumers power or the purchasing power of people whom your customers are will also get impacted because of that reason. Okay, high economic growth will also lead to high inflation. That means the cost will also go high, the cost of capital, the cost of labor, and cost of raw material will also go high. That's fine, but your revenues will also keep on increasing. Next, how a country reacts to an economic cycle. That means how a country is taking decisions in terms of infrastructure, in terms of economic policies, in terms of taxation, when they are moving, when they're growing as an economy from a developing nascent stage to the mature stage. So we as a company or a corporation have to be very cautious about how the decision making is happening in the economy. Okay, developing economies tend to rely heavily on a particular commodity. So a lot of time what happens is that if a country is getting independent and they have a particular natural resource, so they try to exploit that natural resource so that an income can be earned for the population or for the country. So whenever you're operating in that developing country, that reliance can impact you as a business, because the country might focus on all the subsidies, all the benefits being given to that particular commodity or that particular sector itself, and your sector might get neglected. Okay, so that point has to be considered when you're investing in an economy. High reliance on a particular commodity. Okay, high reliance on a particular commodity is a big problem, because what happens is that if suppose I am relying on oil, or I am relying on a particular tourism business, and that business gets impacted, then your economy will not be able to run, your people will not be able to get income out of it, and hence your company will not be able to make any sale out of that. So your reliance on a particular commodity is actually equal to your country being more sensitive to the price of that commodity. So you can look at oil prices. So when the oil prices started decline and started going below $30 per barrel, so a lot of smaller companies or smaller countries like Venezuela, those countries started facing problem because their only main source of income was oil, and they were not able to fetch a good amount of money with respect to the oil output they are bringing on table. So that is the first point that we talked about, economic growth life cycle. Then we'll talk about the political risk. This is interesting because there are few points which we normally do not see in a lot of other books. So political risk is basically how a government is changing, or the decisions that are made by the government. Are those decisions very arbitrary, or the way the government is actually operating? That is primarily composed of your political risk. I'm just repeating once again. Political risk is the way the government is operating, way the government is changing, and the way the government is taking decisions is actually a political risk. Okay, now what all factors you see in political risk? The first and the foremost, you'll have to mark this as a star in your book: democracies or autocracies. So democracy, people elect their government every 5 years, 4 years. Okay, autocracy, there is primarily one particular person or one particular party that is ruling. So example of that would be China being a one party country, and North Korea being a one person country who is actually ruling that country. So a lot of the time what happened is that companies do prefer authoritarian government, because the decision making is fast. The decision making has to be done by only one person. But if you are in a democracy, then those decision making has to be taken by taking into all the parties, all the members into consensus. That can delay the entire process. Okay, so authoritarian and democracy is the other two aspect of it. But when working with an authoritarian or dictatorship government, then there is high chances that there can be a military coup and the government can quickly change. That is what the second point actually talks about. Okay, you might see a new government or a new dictator coming in place, and that can lead to a sharp discontinuity of your relationship or sharp discontinuity of the policy. So, for example, you are working with North Korea's leader, and you bribed him and you basically helped him to draft a policy which will help your business. Now, when he's not there, his competitor or somebody who was involved in the military coup, he's managing the country. That person might have a different policy or rules which might affect your business and your returns. Okay, so that is the problem with authoritarian. And democracy, the risk is very low, because once the government comes in, you know it is going to stay for the next 5 years, but you know that for the after that 5 years the government might change. So risk is very low, but it is continuous. It will keep on happening every 5 years. Okay, but in an authoritarian government, the risk is very high, but it is discontinuous. I'll quickly take a pause over here and I will walk you through the book. So, economic growth life cycle. Kindly have a quick read, and what we have done is we have highlighted some important lines for you to go through. So Deepika had a query that current pandemic that we are facing, coronavirus, is an impact of country risk. Actually, it's not an impact of country risk, because when we are looking at country risk, we are primarily focusing on investing in a country. What are other factors that might impact in a country? So if you're looking at investing in China, and you know that there's a lot of threat in terms of health sector, in terms of health of employees, then you might not invest. So that particular case might be a reason or a case of a country risk. So I'm assuming that you guys have read the first part, which is economic growth life cycle. I'm moving you guys to the next part, which is political risk. And in political risk, we covered the first part, which is basically continuous versus discontinuous risk. Kindly read the first point in detail. Okay, you can look at this point which is highlighted over here. Risk in democracies are continuous, because every 5 years the government is changing, but it is generally low. That means even if you're caught in some activity or the policy change, that policy change will not be very drastic. Okay, but in contrast, when you're working with dictatorship or an authoritarian government, the risks are basically discontinuous. That means you might have to deal with one single person for the next 30 years. Okay, but whenever that happens, that risk is very high, because it might be the case that your company might be thrown out of that country altogether. Okay, so that is the first point, continuous and discontinued policy. I'll move to the corruption point, which is the second point, which affects your political risk. If there is high corruption in a country, then it becomes very difficult for you to operate in that country. The reason being, corruption is actually an indirect tax to you, because you're not paying directly to the government, but you're paying indirectly to the government official, which is actually reducing your profit and your returns. And if suppose you get caught by a particular regulator while doing this, if you are engaged in a corruption or this bribery kind of activity, then there might be a legal sanction against your firm. Okay, so there have been a lot of cases where JP Morgan has been also been fined, then HSBC has also been fined for corruption or these related cases in past. Okay, next important point after corruption is your physical violence. This is part of the political risk, because suppose you're operating in a particular state or a country, and a political party is actually against you, a small fraction of political parties against you, and they're not letting you operate in that region. That is leading to a lot of economic cost and a physical cost for you. What is an economic cost? Because if you're trying to operate in that country which is very hostile, then you might have to pay for the insurance cost, you might have to pay for the security of your employee. Okay, and also there can be a physical cost, because if there is an employee working for you and he or she gets harmed in that process, then you'll have to pay that employee hospitalization, will have to pay that employee and compensation. Those kind of economic cost and the physical cost you face as an organization. Okay, I'll give you an example. When Tata was trying to put out a project in West Bengal, Chingur, Mamata Banerjee actually protested against it, and that led to Tata moving out of Bengal and moving to Gujarat, right? So because they were not able to operate in their proper manner. Okay. Next important point within political risk is basically your nationalization and expropriation risk. This is primarily government overtaking. Nationalization is primarily government overtaking your company. Okay, so for example, Air India was primarily previously run by Tata, and then it was kind of taken over by the government. So a lot of banks in 1970s were taken over by government or nationalized by the government. So when this happens, the owner of that entity or that company does not get a fair value because it has been done forcefully. So nationalization done by the government is a big risk that you face, that you might lose your business. Second is expropriation risk. That means government is bringing in indirect ways to collect taxes or money from the corporate. So that is basically an indirect arbitrary taxes that you face. For example, government making CSR as a mandatory for all the offices, all the corporations, and you have to pay around 2% of your entire revenue as a part of the CSR activity. That becomes your indirect tax. So this is a way through which government is actually indirectly trying to expropriate money from companies. So this is also huge political risk for you. Okay, so within political risk, we talked about continuous and discontinuous risk. That was basically a democracy and autocracy. Within political risk, we also talked about corruption. Corruption being very high, you face problems like implicit tax, returns of profit going down, and you also face risk of sanctions from the regulator. Then we talked about physical violence, that is economic cost versus physical cost, and then nationalization and expropriation. I'll quickly take a pause over here, and I'll walk you through the book. Kindly read the first part or the highlighted part of corruption topic. You will realize that we have kind of covered the aspect also in detail. Right, I'm assuming that you guys have gone through it. Now I'm moving to the next part, which is physical violence. So it talks about both economic cost and your physical cost. Economic cost is the insurance and security cost. Physical cost is possible harm to your employees or investor. Then we also talked about nationalization or expropriation cost. So government taking over the country, taking over your company arbitrarily, and there are some other taxes that the government is actually trying to impose on you. So we covered the second point, which is basically our political risk. We'll move towards the third bigger point, which is your legal risk. So legal risk is very straightforward, nothing much to talk about. So primarily how transparent and how independent is your country's legal system. That makes a big difference when you're operating in a country. Okay, so legal system, that has to be trusted. That means whenever I go and take my case to the legal system, it will be resolved in a transparent way and fairly. Okay, and perceived to be fair, the legal system that is trusted and perceived to be fair attracts more foreign investment, right? Because companies are investing billions of dollars in a country, and if they feel that the judiciary is not fair or not independent, then that can lead to losses for them. Okay, so that is the reason they look at this legal risk in detail. And firm actually do not invest in countries where the legal system is biased towards a political party, biased towards a group of companies. Okay, subject to government interference. That means government is trying to appoint the judges of the Supreme Court or trying to appoint the judges of the High Court, or if the legal system itself is very slow. That means if you have put out a case in front of the court legal system and it will take 20-30 years for the dispute to get resolved, so the companies will not invest in such kind of a country. So legal system is very, very important for you to assess when you are assessing a country. Okay, next important part is your economic structure. Okay, when you're saying economic structure, what kind of reliance you face on a particular economy, so a particular commodity or a service. Okay, for example, there are countries like Abu Dhabi, which basically more relies on oil, Saudi, which basically relies on oil, Then services, you will see Dubai, a lot of tourism it attracts. Thailand, a lot of tourism it attracts. So if there is no tourism, or there is no that commodity being produced, or the price of that commodity going down, that can have a huge impact on the economy of that region and indirectly affecting you as a business. Okay, so downturn in a particular demand or goods or services can have a significant impact on you and make can also lead to losses. Okay, there is always a trade-off between a long-term and short-term growth. So if you feel that the scenario where suppose oil prices are going down and these are short-term scenarios, then you can invest in a country and be rest assured that over a period of time this effect will go away and the economy will pick up and will grow. But if you feel that this economy structure or reliance on a particular commodity or a service is basically for a long term and there is no change that you see happening, then that will lead to more risk, and hence you will look for whether if I stay in that country, will that lead for a long term growth for me as a business. Okay, you'll also look at economies diversification. So if you look at India, so obviously India is more reliant on services, but you have also have agriculture as a income producing things, a lot of other manufacturing businesses also which contribute towards the economy, towards the tax base of the country. So the more diversified your country is in terms of providing services or providing commodity or raw materials, so that becomes that makes your economy very strong. Okay, so these are the factors that you have to look into when you're looking at a country from the economic perspective. Okay, so basically Michael Porter was one of the economists. What he tried to do is he tried to identify few important factors, so so that we can assess a country in a very subjective and objective manner. The first being factor condition. Factor condition means all the raw materials, all the natural resources that a country already has. So if a country has a lot of natural resources, then there is high chances that a country's growth will be very high. Okay, demand condition in a country. Okay, so if suppose there is a huge demand from a particular country because the population itself is so wide, for example India, then it makes sense for the companies to open up their offices in India, right? So 1.35 billion people consuming a lot of services, a lot of product in India, which is a great opportunity for businesses. So demand condition, how much strong it is and how resistant it is with respect to change in the market. Then what about the related industry? So what are other competing industries or other supplementing industries actually working? So if you're suppose an automobile company, then you will look for how a spare part company is operating in that country. So because that spare part will become part of your car also. So you have to look at not only your particular sector, but other sectors which are actually surrounding you and helping you to grow in that country. So how big or how efficiently those sectors are also working. So related industry becomes a very important part. Then what is the strategy that a firm has to follow when they are entering into the country? That means, for example, if you want to open up a bank in India, then you might face a license requirement from RBI. Similarly, if you want to open up a telecom company, you might have to go to try and open up, need a license. So what is the restriction or barrier to entry in that organization, in that country, and how much rivalry or what is the competition that is prevailing in the current market? So if you look at the e-commerce market right now, so you'll find Flipkart, Amazon fighting heavily for dominance. So when if you are trying to open a e-commerce company, then you need to have a deep pocket with money so that you can sustain that fight, right? So you'll have to understand what is the rivalry between the companies and what is the normal structure of business or the way how the business is actually being run in that country. Okay, I'll just take a quick pause over here and I'll walk you through the book. We first covered legal risk. Kindly go through the highlighted part. I'm assuming that you guys have gone through it. I'm taking you to the next part, which is economic structure. The important parts are highlighted. Kindly read the content. We have already covered that in detail. Second highlighted part primarily talks about the short-term and long-term growth that you see in that country with respect to the economy. So that becomes an important part also when you're looking at the country risk. Okay, and next, basically the four factors from Michael Porter, which helps you to analyze whether a competitive edge is available in a country or not, whether you should invest in that country or not. Kindly read these 4 points highlighted, mark it as star in your book. Okay, I'm moving ahead to the next part. How do you evaluate a country's risk? So there are certain service providers who basically help us to evaluate a country's risk. So there is PRS. There are some media outlets also, media companies, Economist, for example, which basically helps you to assess. They basically rank countries, and they try to understand. They try to assess a country on the basis of a lot of factors. It can be political, it can be economical, it can be legal, social, a lot of those, and on the basis of that they try to rank a country. Okay, the World Bank is also involved into it. So you will find these three over here. The political risk services, they basically use 22 measures ranging from political, finance, economic risk to come up with a ranking. Similarly, there are media outlets like Euromoney or Economist. These are actually your media companies having magazines and services, and they also come up with a country risk to for their subscribers. Okay, so Euromoney basically takes a detail about from a detailed survey of 400 economists, and on the basis of that survey, they try to identify what is the risk of a country. Then World Bank also gets release a report with respect to the country's quality, which also has a lot of factors like regulatory quality, political stability, the rule of law, and accountability. So each of them is actually trying to assess the country risk on basis of their own methodology. And so there are some problems when you compare the output that you receive from these three services. Is basically the problem that you face is the first one is that you cannot compare, because see, political risk services is actually using some different mechanism to identify countries risk. Similarly, World Bank is taking some different mechanism, so comparison this becomes very difficult. Okay, secondly, the data that is generally done is done for the economists or for the bureaucrats and not for the investors. Okay, so the data being collected or assessed is more from the perspective of bureaucrats and for economists. So it becomes less relevant for investors to actually invest in that country. You looking at these factors or these ratings. Okay, that is the second point. Second, then the next point is the ranking, and how is the relevance of that ranking. Okay, that means, for example, if I look at two countries, okay, country A, so I'll take three countries now, country B, country C. Suppose if this country is at rank 51, okay, this country is ranked at 71 and this country is ranked at 91. Okay, so and we know that 100 is better. If you reach 100 to score, then you're a better country. Okay, so you'll understand the difference between these two is 20. Again, this difference is 20. Now when you look at this number or these ranking, these are all ranking 51, 71, 91. So ranking is not a relative ranking. That means you cannot say that country B is as better than country A as country C is better than country B based on this ranking, because the difference is 20-20. You cannot say that. Okay, so ranking is only telling you that country C is better, but how much better it is, you cannot understand it from that ranking itself. Okay, so that is a problem of your ranking structure. So the last point, when you look at it, ranking, it's not a true score. You realize it's not a true score, it's actually just a rank. It doesn't tell you how much better it is or the country is. Okay, so there are a lot of evaluating factors involved in these three services. So I'll quickly take a pause and I'll walk you through the book. So in the book you will find the first three point itself as an introduction to these services. and quickly go through it, and then at the bottom, when the highlighted part you'll see the problems that are being highlighted for all the three services. Kindly walk through it. Okay, I am assuming that you guys have gone through this paragraph. There are 3 points mentioned: first, second, and third. So you can quickly summarize and read it. Okay, this point basically tells us the limitation of the problem that we are facing with respect to the services being provided by these three outlets for ranking of countries. Okay, I'm walking you through the next part: sovereign credit risk. Sovereign credit risk is nothing but country's credit risk. Now, how come a country's credit risk comes into picture? Suppose you have bought a bond from US government, and if that US government default, that's a credit risk for you, because the amount of money that you have given will not come back. Similarly, if a country is taking a loan from a bank, okay, or a World Bank or a bigger private sector bank, and that country cannot pay back the amount, and that's a credit risk that lender faces. Okay, so the sovereign credit risk is primarily about the country's credit risk. Measure of a country's risk that it will default on its debt. That debt can be a foreign debt, that means somebody to some outside the organization, outside the country, or it can be an internal debt also, that means debt taken from domestic people itself. So how do you, there are two types of sovereign credit risk, and how do we do it? You try to assess the foreign currency and own currency rating, or you try to assess what is the risk when you're taking money in foreign currency. That means India raising debt in USD, raising debt in pound. Okay, that is a foreign currency defaults, a foreign currency debt. Okay, then the next is local currency debt. That means India is raising money in INR itself. Okay, so a lot of government of India's bond, the treasury bond that are issued as basically issued in INR. Okay, so if suppose we talk about the first thing, that is your foreign currency default. That means you defaulted on a loan that was denominated in foreign currency. Okay, so normally what you see is that default issue is basically attractive to global banks and other international lenders. Okay, so basically when you issue a debt to a global audience, you try to issue it in a foreign currency, so primarily a dollar or euro, because the audience for that currency is huge, and it will be easy for you to raise money through that currency itself. That's the reason you wish to issue a debt on foreign currency. Okay, but what is the risk if suppose tomorrow if tomorrow you issued a debt on USD, US dollar, and you are not able to pay back that debt because you do not have US dollar with you? That's a huge risk. And the problem is that you cannot print US dollar, because that's not your domestic currency. Okay, so the second point primarily talks about that USD can be printed by only the US government, and since you issued a foreign currency debt, if that currency is not available for you, that is a big problem for you, and you might default on your debt itself. Okay, so the risk is of not able to print that currency, that is a foreign currency default part. Second is your local currency default part. That means you defaulted on your own currency. How is it possible? Okay, I mean, you can print your own currency, right? So how can you default in your own respective currency? So we have seen two examples: Brazil and Russia. They have defaulted in their own particular currency itself previously, and there's a lot of reason for it, so we'll talk about those reasons also. So Moody did a research and tried to identify what are the major reasons why countries are defaulting in their own currency debt. Okay, the first reason was basically gold reserves. So primarily before 1975, a lot of countries defaulted on their own debt because previously we were following a gold reserve. That means if you have a certain amount of gold, then only you will be able to print currency of your own country. Okay, so if you do not have gold, you cannot print. So that created a restriction, and hence you cannot pay back your debt. That was gold reserve. Second is your currency union. Now, when Greece defaulted on its debt, why it cannot pay back a debt which is euro? Because it cannot print euro. The euro is printed by ECB basically. So when you are a part of a local union or a currency union, you lose the independence to issue a currency or a print a currency, and that can lead to a problem for you. So Greece is a big example for us to from this category. Then currency debasement. Debasement means inflation. So suppose if you have issued a lot of your own currency, then it would lead to high inflation within your current country itself. You will be able to pay back your debt, but inflation will shoot because amount of money that is available in the country will increase drastically. And that is a problem that a lot of African countries, Zimbabwe is like facing right now, of the inflation problem or hyperinflation problem. So if you want to avoid that, you will not print up currency, and that will lead to you defaulting in your own currency itself. Okay, so we talked about two things. We talked about foreign currency default. Why are you defaulting on that foreign currency debt? Because you cannot print out that currency. Second is local currency default. How can you default on your own currency which you can print? Because there are reasons for it. The first is gold standard. Second is your currency union or currency cartel, which Greece is a good example of it. Then we have also seen about inflation or currency debasement. Currency debasement also means the value of your currency going down because of inflation. Okay, so I'll take a quick pause and walk you through the book. So you can read the first paragraph, which talks about the sovereign credit risk. Okay, I'm assuming that you guys have gone through the content now. Please come to the foreign currency default, and you'll find that they are not able to print that foreign currency, and hence they are defaulting on that currency. They have given a lot of examples also, but I have not covered it in detail. For example, they talked about South American countries defaulting, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, on foreign currency debt. The next part is local currency default. So they have given an example of Brazil and Russia, which we also talked about. And what are the reasons why you default in a particular currency, your own currency? First is gold reserve. Mark this point as star in your book. And kindly go through all the 3 points in detail. We have covered these 3 points also in the presentation. Okay, mark these 3 points as star. I'm moving ahead. What happens when you actually default on a debt, or if country defaults on the debt? Okay, first of all, historically what we have seen is, historically means in the pre 1960s time, if you default on a country's debt, there might be a military action. So British government has previously taken some military actions in American South African countries when they were not able to pay back their debt. Okay, but right now you will not see that happening. But what is the other effect of having a default of your debt? Okay, first of all, you might see your economy going down. Reason being, since you do not have money to pay to service your economy, and hence you are not able to pay back your debt. That is an underlying logic. So your economy should go down, your GDP should go down. Also, once you default on your debt, your rating will also go down. Your country's rating or sovereign rating will go down. And the next time when you want to raise money, you will have to give high interest rate. That means your borrowing cost will also increase. Okay, there can be trade retaliation also. That means suppose if I defaulted on US government's debt, suppose US government had given me $10 billion and I am supposed to pay back and I cannot pay back because of the economic condition not being good. So US government can do trade retaliation. That means they might restrict our businesses or Indian businesses to operate in their country, or the goods that we are exporting to that country, there might be a lot of charges or duties that are being implemented on those goods to have a negative effect on our economy for that non-payment of debt. That is basically your trade retaliation. Then you will also find the banking system being very fragile because the country doesn't have money, the regulator doesn't have money. So if a bank defaults, they might not be able to protect that bank or the depositors altogether. Okay, so that is the reason that banking system generally becomes very fragile and very prone to risk, and there can be a high chances of political change. That means there might be a change of the finance minister or the government itself in the country because the government has failed to pay back debt or manage its finance properly. So these are the factors these are the things that we see when we see that there is a default that has happened, and what are the effect that can happen for those defaults. I'll just quickly walk you through the content from your book. So they tried to summarize it over here. What are the consequences of a sovereign default? Kindly read the content in detail. Kindly read the paragraph, and important points are also highlighted over here. In case you guys have any query, you can mark it in the chat box. Next point being factors that influence sovereign default. How can you say that there is high chances that a country might default in near future? What are the factors that impact? Okay, so one of the factors that we try to assess is, or the way we try to assess a country's sovereign default is the credit rating of that country. Okay, or the corporate assess, basically the way a credit rating agency assesses the corporate rating, they also try to assess a country's rating. Okay, and we can look at that country's rating also to understand if investing in that country is a risky proposition or not. What are the major factors that impact your sovereign default? First is country's level of indebtedness. If a country is taking lot of debt or lot of loan, then there's high chances that it will default. Okay, what is the tax base that the country has? That means if lot of out of 100 people, if 50-60% of the people are paying taxes properly, then the collection of tax will be high for that country. And you also need to see what is the diversification of the tax base. That means suppose if the country is only getting a tax from service sector, or if it's only getting a tax from tourism, then that is also risky. Okay, so how big is your tax base is also an indication of you defaulting on your debt. That is the second point. Third point, what are the social security commitments that you have given to your country's people? So there are a lot of countries who offer healthcare services, universal healthcare. For example, UK gives a universal healthcare services. There are countries which gives pension to its senior citizens. There are countries which gives a lot of other benefits with respect to free meals, free reduced transportation fares for its population. So those kind of social security benefits, when you give to your country's people, it increases your burden, it increases your fixed cost, and that is the reason your country might default. Okay, one more example of this would be pension being given to the government employees. Next is your political risk. Okay, now if a country is run by a dictator, there is a high chance that he might not pay the debt back. Okay, or a country, if it's run by a democracy, then there is high chances that they will pay back the debt to the lender, because if they do not, then there can be a political change, or there can be a bad name for that party or the government itself. Okay, so political risk can be assessed if it's a dictatorship or it's a democracy. Dictatorship, that means high chances that they might not pay back the debt itself. Okay, is there an implicit guarantee being given? So when Greece was actually defaulting, when the Portugal government was on the verge of defaulting, so Germany came out as an implicit guarantee to these countries. If you have a guarantee of a bigger nation, then there is less chance that you will default, because even if you default, then the guarantor will pay back the money for you. Okay, so that implicit guarantee basically also plays an important factor when we are assessing or trying to understand the risk of default of a country. So I'll quickly take a pause over here and walk you through the book. The first paragraph, kindly read it. Those who are done, you can look at these points. We have just now covered these points: social security, tax base, political risk. So Sharanya, implicit guarantee means if any bigger country is actually helping you, is standing behind you. So even if you default, there is a guarantee given by that bigger country. So you can read this example: Germany or France helping other smaller countries in European Union so that they do not default. That's an implicit guarantee. I hope I have answered the query. Kindly read all the points. This is a summary of this point. They have summarized all the 4 points in detail over here. So once we are done with what are the factors that we see for a country's defaulting, we can come back to the rating piece, which we initially talked about. So the rating agency will also rate a country. Okay. So when they are rating a country, they will primarily try to rate that country on two aspects. This is an important part in this chapter. Okay. So country rating can be done into 2 parts. That is, first is local currency rating and second is foreign currency rating. Okay. And you will generally find, you'll generally find that local currency rating is very high, or as high as the foreign currency rating. There is a reason, because you can print your own currency. Even you will face a lot of problems, but you can still print your currency and you can pay back the debt. Okay, so that is the reason you will find that the local currency rating is higher, generally higher or equal to the foreign currency rating. Okay, but there can be some anomalies also. So if you look at the first paragraph, it generally talks about the local currency generally being higher, currency rating generally being higher than the foreign currency. Okay, but there was one anomaly that we saw with respect to India, when the foreign currency rating was higher than the local currency rating. Okay, and you can look at this diagram wherein a country has been rated, okay, on the foreign currency rating and also on the local currency rating. So you can find Argentina being rated as CAA1. Okay, you can find Brazil being rated. So there are different parameters that are being used for the foreign currency rating, or different parameters being used for the local currency rating. And at this side, you will also find outlook. Now, what does this outlook mean? You can see three things: positive, negative, and stable. So suppose if I'm giving a outlook, I've rated a country and I'm giving an outlook of negative, that means in future I see that rating going down. If I've given a outlook of positive, that means in future I see a rating going up, and stable, that means the rating will more or less remain stable in near future. So they try to give an outlook even with along with the rating. What do they see happening in future with respect to that country? Okay. So that is the first part, that is local currency rating and foreign currency rating. I'll quickly walk you through this part on your book. Kindly read the last paragraph of this page. So Madhusudan sir is asking, in case of India, is there an implicit guarantee? Not sure, because if generally we feel that either Russia or US is there to help us, but As a country, we have never faced that situation where we are not able to pay back the debt and we have to go to a stronger economy to help us. So generally, it has been seen on those countries which are very smaller in size and just now got an independence. They don't have economical power to grow, and that's the reason they might default. Okay, coming back to this topic, this paragraph primarily is highlighting that local currency rating thing. Generally, local currency rating is at least as high as the foreign currency rating. Okay, if I look at the second paragraph, this basically tells us, give us few details about rating agencies or rating being given to countries. So rating generally as high as AAA or AA, okay, has generally performed historically well with zero default rates. That means if you are highly rated, there is very less chance that you might default in near future. But if you are in triple B or double B or single B, that means you might, there is high chances that you might default very fast. Okay, kindly read this paragraph. So Sharanya is asking, implicit rating and bailout, is it same? No. Implicit guarantee means you know beforehand itself that there is a bigger country which is trying to protect it. Bailout is basically a helping hand to a country to not default. There is no direct relationship between that these two countries. For example, if tomorrow India default, they might get money from UK also, from London also. Okay, they might get money from France also. But when you're talking about implicit guarantee, that can be some bigger organization, bigger country which we have long-term relationships. That can be Russia or US. I'm assuming that you guys have gone through this paragraph in detail. Last paragraph talks about that there is a rating. What rating companies do or rating organization do is they create a transition matrix. The transition matrix tells you that generally it's a 1-year transition matrix, and it tells you that if you start today at say AA, what is the probability that you might go to a AAA? What is the probability that you might go to a single A? You might go to a triple B, or you might upgrade, or you might downgrade. What is the probability of that? So transition matrix is actually trying to assess that probability for a rating within a period of 1 year. Okay, kindly read this paragraph. So Shivangi is asking why rating for local currency and foreign currency is same. So it's not always same. Local currency can be equal to your foreign currency rating, or it can be higher. Generally, it is higher. Okay, because you can print your own currency and you can pay back your debt. So we are actually, so rating agency is actually trying to see if that country has taken a debt in foreign currency, what should be that rating? If a country has taken a debt in local currency, what should be that rating? They're trying to assess that. Okay, I'm assuming that you guys have gone through the last paragraph. Now I'm entering into a very important part of this chapter. Please mark it as star. Sovereign default spread, very, very important part from this chapter. Okay, what is a sovereign default spread? Okay, sovereign default spread is basically the difference between the yield of your organization or your country's debt compared to a risk-free country. That means generally we try to compare with a stronger economy, and what is the difference in the yield that you see. Okay, I will walk you through one example and come back to that slide. Okay, suppose Indian government has issued a bond in USD. That means the bond is issued in US dollar, and the maturity of that bond is 10 years, and the yield of that bond is 10%. Okay, now when I'm looking at a sovereign default spread, I will try to compare it with US government bond. Why US government bond? Because I have issued a bond in USD. So for me, a risk-free security or a comparable security will be a US denominated bond, US government issued bond. So we'll compare it with a US government bond, which is obviously issued in their domestic currency, that is USD, for same 10 years. So the time has to be same, 10 year, 10 year. And if suppose I see a yield of 7%, so the spread or the gap between these two, 10% and 7%, that gap is a sovereign default spread. That gap is sovereign default spread. Okay. So let's see how exactly this 10% is coming, and how exactly this spread is changing, and how does it signifies if a country is risky or not. Okay, let us take that example. Suppose India was at 10% yield, then how does this 10% yield comes into picture? Suppose the price of the bond was 100 and the income or the coupon or the interest on the bond was 10. That means the yield on the bond will be 10 divided by 100, that is 10%. That essentially means if you want to get an income of $10 from that bond, you'll have to pay 100 rupees. That means you're investing 100 rupees to get an income of 10% or $10. That is your yield. Okay, that is the current price. We have assumed that it is 10%. Okay, now if suppose there is huge demand for that bond in the market, then the price of that bond should go up. That means this scenario can happen, that the price is going from 100 to 110. Now the yield has reduced. Do you see that? The yield has reduced. Okay, that means your yield is moving from 10% to this. That means your spread is becoming narrower, because US government yield is 7%. Your spread has come down from 10% to 9.09. That means the spread has reduced. Now the spread is not 3%, it has come down. So we can look this scenario and say that whenever the spread is reducing, that means the risk is reducing, because you are getting closer to the United States government's yield. Okay, and also you can see this happening because the price of your bond is going high. When market is confident on your bond, then only they will invest. And why are they investing? Because they feel that the risk of your country is low, and that essentially is reflected in your sovereign default spread, because that is also getting narrower. Okay, let us take a new example. For example, if nobody wants to buy Indian government bond, then the price of that bond will go down. That means it will go down to 90. And see the yield. The yield is increasing. Because the base is becoming small. So your yield is spreading from 10% to 11.5%. Do you see that the spread is increasing? Now this, how do you summarize this second situation? Whenever your spread is increasing, your risk is increasing. Okay, that is reflected, because that is also again reflected in the prices, because nobody wants to purchase your bond. That's why your prices are going down. So all is interrelated. Now can you relate how your yield is changing? Okay, suppose your yield is increasing, that means your spread is increasing, that means your risk is increasing. If your yield is reducing, that means your spread is reducing, that means your risk is reducing. Okay, and this yield is calculated on the basis of market price of the bond, which is being traded every single second in the market. So Mohit Agarwal is asking if the spread is maximize or minimize, what is good? So if the spread is minimum, then it is good for a country. If the spread is increasing, that is high risk. Okay, now once you understand this concept of how the spread is changing and how it shows you the risk of that business, or risk of that country, then you can easily understand the previous slide. Okay, in the previous slide we have seen in the table 4 countries. Okay, now 4 countries, all of them have dollar denominated bonds for 10 years. All of them have dollar denominated bond of 10 years. What is the yield of each of these countries? 4.5%, 4.05%. Okay, and what is the yield of US government issued bond on the same 10 year? It is 2.47. Do you see this column? 2.47. They've just calculated the spread, the difference. So 4.50 minus 2.47 will give you 2.03. Similarly, 4.05 minus 2.47 will give you 1.58. That is a spread. Okay, that is a sovereign default spread. Okay, kindly read this paragraph. Kindly read this paragraph. It basically will tell you the difference, how that column has been calculated, or the sovereign default spread has been calculated. Now, why do we need a sovereign default spread when we have a rating? So please understand that the last column, or the last column of the table, is actually Moody's rating. But do you realize Peru and Brazil both have same rating, that is uh, Baa2. But when we look at their spread, do you see that Brazil has a bigger spread, that is 2.03, as compared to Peru, which is 1.46. So if you look at the rating, you might not be able to bifurcate which country is riskier, because both of them have the same rating. But if you look at a sovereign spread, even if there is a difference of 0.01%, you can identify which country is riskier as compared to the other. And in this case, even though when the rating is same, you can identify that the Brazil is riskier than Peru because the spread is higher. Okay, and that is the reason we have given this document, or this table for your reference. Okay, I'll quickly take a pause and I'll walk you through the book. First paragraph primarily talks about sovereign credit spread. Kindly read the first paragraph. In the exam, so Sharanya is asking, in the exam, how do we calculate the spread? It is not expected that you'll have to calculate the sovereign default spread. You need to understand the logic of how it changes and what is the risk that it faces. So you will not be asked to calculate. Now Madhusudan sir is also asking, sovereign default spread can be zero. So generally you will not find sovereign default spread being zero, but if you are zero, that means your yield and your risk-free yield is same, and that will not happen generally. Kindly read the first paragraph. It talks about the sovereign default spread. It also gives you an example. Suppose you have issued a current bond with a US denominator bond with a yield of 8%, and similarly the US government has issued a bond with 2% yield. The difference of 6% is the sovereign default spread. Now kindly read this paragraph, mark it as star, this part. As bond trade and bond yield rise and fall. Okay, as bond trade, bond yield rise and fall. We saw that in the table. When the price is going up, what is happening? Your denominator is getting bigger, and that means your yield is going down. When your price is going down, your denominator is getting smaller, and that means your yield is going up. So whenever there is a bond is being traded, that leads to a change in the price, and that leads to yield being rising or falling. And that is the reason there is a change in the credit spread, revealing information about the country's risk. So that is why you see that happening. So this part is important because it summarizes the discussion that we had on that concept. Okay, I'm assuming that the concept has been cleared. If you, in case you have any doubt, you can post it out as a chat, or we'll be opening up for doubt in some time. The next part is credit default swap. Okay, what is a CDS, or a credit default swap? Suppose I am 123 firm. I am an investor or a company who has purchased a bond from ABC organization or ABC company. Okay, now this bond was purchased for say 7 years, and now 1 or 2 years have passed, and now if I am this investor and I feel that the company from which I have taken a bond, that is ABC company, now there is a high risk that a company might default and I might not get that principal amount that I had invested in that bond. So in order to protect myself from that risk, that credit risk, what I generally do is I can take an insurance from some other company. That insurance is nothing but your credit default swap. Okay, what I can do, I can go to a bank when I can tell them, please give me a credit default swap on this ABC company. Okay, so the bank will become a CDS seller, and I am the investor will become a CDS buyer. So since I am taking an insurance, I will have to pay a premium for that contract. Okay, and suppose if I've taken an insurance or that CDS contract for 3 years, and I'm making a quarterly payment to that bank, if suppose within that 3 years, if ABC company defaults, then I will receive all the entire money from that bank. So it is actually a protection for me, or an insurance for me that I'm taking for the credit risk that I'm facing from that original company, that is ABC. Okay. So CDS is primarily a OTC derivative contract wherein you go to a bank, you directly negotiate that contract with the bank. Okay. And because of which what happens is that there is a huge liquidity problem. That means you cannot generally move out of that contract fast, because there is no liquid market available for you to sell and move out. Okay. And also there is a risk of default of the protection seller. That means if suppose this bank also defaults, then there is no insurance cover for you, because somebody who was giving you a cover itself defaulted. So there is also a risk of that default of that insurance seller or the CDS seller that we have to take into consideration. Okay. And please understand that CDS is a contingent claim. That means the bank will pay only and only when ABC company defaults or that credit event happens. They will not pay otherwise. That's why it is called as a contingent claim, which is paid when an event has happened. Kindly read this paragraph on the two important problems. I'm moving to the book where the CDS part is also mentioned. So you can read the first paragraph, which is highlighted, important part. We'll be also sharing the Swagger books with you, which is highlighted books with you, from which you can start your preparation. So the first paragraph talks about the CDS contract, and the second paragraph primarily talks about the problems in the CDS contract. The CDS contract being illiquid and the buyer is exposed to the default of the protection seller. That is a CDS contract. I'm assuming that you guys have got the concept. In case anybody is having a doubt, you can post it on a chat. And for those who are attending the demo session, this is basically the demo session. This is the way we basically conduct our session. So the first session is free for you all. In case you wish to attend the next session, you will have to join the batch. The details will be shared on your WhatsApp number within a day or two. In case anybody has doubt, they can ask a question. They can post their question on chat, or they can unmute themselves directly. They can unmute themselves and they can start asking question in case they have. Okay, cool. So I'm assuming that people do not have any much query, because we tried to solve that query within the session itself when they were asking doubts through chat. So next week also we're going to be having a session on Saturday and Sunday both, and we're going to be starting out with a new topic. Okay. Thank you very much, guys, for your patience, and thank you very much for joining the session. Thank you, guys.